Fala pessoal do Farol de Pouso, sejam muito bem-vindos ao nosso 6º episódio do nosso podcast. Estou aqui mais uma vez, João Vitor Ferreira, apresentando esse belíssimo podcast e hoje, de uma forma um pouquinho diferente, já vou te deixar brifado para não ter surpresas. Hoje o nosso convidado, ele é da África do Sul e faremos o podcast totalmente em inglês. Então, tá aí uma grande oportunidade para você de aperfeiçoar o teu inglês. Você vai ouvir um pouquinho do inglês meio enferrujado meu e o inglês bom dos outros caras e com sotaque. Então, vai ser bom para você treinar vocabulário, teu listening. Então, aproveite e se inscreva no nosso canal do YouTube, no Spotify e também na Apple Podcast para se manter sempre informado das novidades. So, after this quick presentation, what do we have today, Felix? Tell us.
Hey, Mr. Johnny Victor. Now you're upgraded to Johnny Victor. Thanks for the nice introduction in Portuguese language. And Jason was just giving that look. I was like, what the heck is that? Like, what are they talking, right? And so, as João said, we will be fully in English from now on. So you're welcome to this first podcast of Farol de Pouso. Aviation, FP Aviation in English. And today with us here, we have a very, very, very nice guy, a friend of mine and a colleague aviator who started his career down there in South Africa, where you can get all those lekker biltongs and all the goodies and meat and all sorts of things. And he started his aviation career right there in South Africa, and he's gonna tell us about it right away. He flew Beech 1900s and then the Avro RJ, you know that kind of Jumbolino, sometimes they say, which is the jet with the high wing 4 engines. And then he moved into a 330 position and then the A380 position 1 year after that. And he's completed 16 years flying, and he has a very good story to tell us about because he is active and motivated, and we're gonna learn about it. Welcome to this first English version of the podcast, Jason Northwood.
Round of applause.
Very good evening to you, Felix and João. It's great to see you again, Felix. It's been ages. You still look as happy as ever and as vibrant, full of life, as always before. Thank you for having me on the show, gentlemen. To all the listeners listening from home, welcome to you. And thanks very much for having me. It's an absolute privilege.
It is a real pleasure seeing you again, Jason, after some time. And I hope you are doing well and the kids are also doing well and your wife. And yeah, it is a pleasure having you here on board with us. Thanks for taking your time of South African evening where you could be doing some other activities, and thanks for being here with us. All right, so talk us through, man. Let us know, how was it, your aviation career? Tell me all about it, or tell us all about it, please.
Thanks very much, Felix. So I started my career in 2004. I learned to fly at a very simple flight school on the east coast of South Africa in a small town called East London. And it was more of a flight club as opposed to a flight school. The beauty of that really was that rather than being pushed through the school like a sausage machine, you know, there were so many enthusiasts, aviation enthusiasts, aircraft owners, vintage aircraft owners as well around the flight school, which really gave me some good exposure to aviation early on. So I finished up my training at Border Aviation Club, and I also got my first job there as a ab initio flight instructor. I spent 1.5 years conducting training at the club, and after that I made a very lucky break. It was a large jump from a Cessna 172 up onto a Citation jet, where I operated up West Africa, and it was really a huge learning curve. The training onto the citation jet at the time was it wasn't very procedural. It was very rushed, and as you guys know, the weather up West Africa is not for sissies, that's for sure. So it took me a long time to get ahead of myself, or get my mind around the operation. And it was a very sporadic, unorganized operation, charter work, flying up and down West Africa. I didn't spend too much time there. And then I was very fortunate enough to get into a company called Salenta Aviation, which is a contract company based in South Africa, but they do work all over Africa. They have a fleet of caravans, Beechcraft 1900s, ATRs, and nowadays they also have ERJ 145s. So at the time I joined, I was placed on the Beech 1900, and I spent the first 3 years flying up West and North Africa. And I think that was probably the part of my career that gave me the best grounding, Felix. The operation was interesting, to say the least. We were based, my first tour of duty was in Liberia on the west coast of Africa, which had recently been in civil war.
Monrovia.
Long before that. Yeah, Monrovia, that's correct. And we operated out of Monrovia into Abidjan, into Sierra Leone, into Guinea, and all those sorts of places. And just to give you a small little story on that, to kind of build the picture for the viewers who've never done something like that. My first flight out of Monrovia was to Sierra Leone, but it wasn't to the main airfield in Sierra Leone. It was to a very small airstrip just outside Sierra Leone. And I wouldn't even classify it as an airstrip. In fact, it was more of a piece of road. And we flew a sort of homemade GPS approach into this airstrip. And I was under line training. The guy on my left, the captain, he said to me, "Do you see the runway in front of us?" And all I saw was a big mountain. So it was quite a shocking experience, to be honest. And you could only land in one direction and then take off in the other direction. So we landed on this small piece of road and taxied off down a small sort of gravel strip with the propellers on the 1900 literally touching the grass. And we parked the aeroplane, and the Beech 1900 can take 19 passengers. Mm-hmm. And there was exactly 19 people lined up on the so-called apron, ready to board the 1900. And my eyes were as big as saucers, because I looked out the window and the guy in the front of the queue had a goat over his shoulders. So the captain said to me, "Well, you must go and explain to that guy he can't bring his goat on this aeroplane. So how do you do that?
You say you can goat."
Yeah, exactly. You can goat. Now, you're in a West African country, you're an English speaker, the local language is French. So how do you explain to this guy that he can't bring his goat, which to him is worth a lot of money, onto your 1900? So that took a bit of convincing and a bit of interpretation between myself and the locals. Anyway, we eventually got out of there, and the next 2 months, there was just as many interesting stories. So I spent a lot of time up West Africa. The weather in that part of the world is horrendous. Big thunderstorms, torrential rainfall, and there's very little support from the company, which we'll speak about a little bit later on, in comparison to an operation like Emirates. So when things don't go well, you can't just simply pick up a sat phone or even a radio for that matter and get hold of the company. All the decision making is really up to you.
Do you have phone signal in these regions?
Say again, João?
Do you have a signal to call someone when you have to decide something in these cities?
No, the signal, most of the radio work is on HF. And the signal is really bad, especially when the weather's bad. And even when you are able to reach somebody on HF, most of the time it's somebody who can hardly speak English, and it's a guy with no experience in a small little control tower next to a gravel strip in the middle of the jungle. So in terms of contacting the company, you have no support whatsoever, or even the ground engineers for that matter, if you want to get advice on a technical issue you may be experiencing. So you're really on your own.
Yeah, I face something familiar here something similar here in Brazil, that I fly in the Amazon rainforest. So in the cities in the countryside of the Amazon also doesn't have any signal. So there's nothing we can do. If we get stuck there, we have to wait to go to the city and pray and climb a tree and try to find a signal to call someone.
No mobile network
it's really tough.
Right? So he's operating up there in some places that you cannot get hold of anybody on the mobile phone, because when they are on the ground they cannot have a mobile network, to talk. Wow, this is really interesting, Jason. I don't recall having the opportunity to talk about that on the times when we met. So yeah, tell us a little bit more, because I'm really interested in this in these talks. And Farol de Pouso has this goal of the same kind of talks that we do during cruise. Like I was just coming in yesterday here with this Kiwi captain, and like super nice. He was talking about the island hopping out there in Fiji, Samoa, and so on. So tell us more about how was it to transition into the beach, and then the first transition into the jet, and learning all the systems, pressurization, jets, the jet engine, and so on. So how did you find all that as well?
Yeah, that's a good topic to raise, Felix. And I think, I was very fortunate to the fact that the training with the company that I joined, and I'm talking now about the Beach 1900 company, not the one prior to that on the Citation jet, but the company that I operated the 1900 for, they had a fantastic training department. They operated as per SOP. In my initial interview, they said to me, we don't expect you to fly overweight like a lot of these small fly-by-night operators do. In fact, if you fly overweight, you'll be fired, which is great. So they operated like an airline. But having said so, the training was excellent, the SOPs were excellent, and the company support was excellent. Other than the fact that once you're out there in Africa, you're on your own. And I think that was such a critical phase of my flying career, to start thinking out the box, just jumping forward to an operation like Emirates, where we're flying from ILS to ILS. It's a whole different ball game. If I may just jump forward briefly to a story in Emirates on the 330, flying into Dar es Salaam one night, and we came down, we got overhead the airfield at the MSA. It was dark. There was a few thunderstorms in the area, and the ATC said to us, "You cleared to land," and there was no approach for the runway we were flying on. And it was my resilience in that moment, I think, from the 1900 days, that helped me to think out the box, how we can execute this in now a large wide-bodied airliner to a safe and satisfactory standard. And I remember the captain commenting after the landing, saying, "You can see you've operated in Africa before." And it is. I think it was a privilege going through all those experiences in Africa, having to think out of the box, where it's not just laid out on a plate for you. A lot of the time there's no approach to where you're flying to. You have to improvise. But having said that, fortunately, the operators that I operated for were by no means cowboys. So we would strive to fly a safe operation. And of course, there were limitations within what we were doing at the time.
This resembles what we were trying to do when we started flying the little Senecas up and down when I first joined my air taxi charter. We even to the point when we had a little LOSA program, like line-oriented safety audits, flying Senecas, and people they were just laughing at us, like, you guys are crazy. But yeah, we were trying to do that, and it was not really demanded by the company, but we felt it was the right thing to do. Good. And then tell us about the Avro RJ. So how was the introduction to the other set of two engines then in that wing?
Yeah, that was fantastic. A lot of people speak negatively about the Avro RJ. As you know, you mentioned it earlier. It's got nicknames like the Jambalina. A lot of guys say that it's got 4 hair dryers and not engines. And I went in a little bit apprehensive because, in all honesty, from the outside, the appearance of the aeroplane isn't that good. But once I got into the training and learned about the airplane, and it really started to grow upon me. I grew a deep affinity and love for the Avro, and I was really impressed with what it could do. So I operated it for a South African company called South African Airline. They're a regional airline flying around Southern Africa. And at the time, and they still are to this day, we would fly into a small airstrip in Pietermaritzburg, which is where I'm living at the moment. It's a 1,500 meter strip. I can't remember the width, but it was very narrow, and the elevation was 2,500 feet. And the temperature would get right up to 40 degrees, and there's not many jets that can carry 80 passengers out of an airstrip like that, and surrounded by mountains. It's a mountainous area. So, as much as people may frown upon the Avro, it's quite an impressive little aeroplane, but definitely getting old. So it was a steep learning curve for me. I had 2 engine failures during my time at Airline. I flew it for 3.5 years. Fortunately, the engine failures weren't at the same time. So the first one was en route from Cape Town to Kruger National Park. We lost oil pressure, and we basically shut down the engine just prior to it failing, and diverted and landed safely. It was really a non-event. But the second one was out of Mozambique, which is a small country just north of South Africa on the east coast of Africa. Mm-hmm. We took off out of Mozambique, and on the climb passing level 180, engine number 2 had a catastrophic failure. One of the blades came off the first stage compressor. Oh. And that was an eye-opener. It made a huge noise. In fact, both the captain and I at the time, when we discussed it afterwards, our initial thought was that we had a mid-air with a light aircraft. That's what it felt like, because the aeroplane jolted, it yawed to the left, the autopilot remained engaged. But anyway, we dealt with it, and it turned out to be a positive outcome. But a very impressive little aeroplane. I was also very fortunate enough to fly an air show, my first and last air show in the Avro RJ85, which was a very exciting event as well.
For us Brazilians, this is complete new. So, I personally think that the Avro has the good looks from the outside. I like its nose and the fact that it has that high wing with those hair dryers there. I don't mind them. Yeah. They're actually quite sexy, Yeah. And for me, it was something that always caught my attention. How, why do they have 4 engines? And I think they used to operate the BAE versions into London City or something like that, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So I remember that it was part of my childhood, thinking about why don't we have those kind of planes in Brazil? They look so cool, right? But yeah. So then after that, Jason, what happened next?
Well, next it was the real big break for me, Felix. I had my eyes set on Emirates since I was a young boy. That was my end goal. Emirates had a roadshow in Johannesburg in 2015 that my wife and I attended. And at the time, there was a surplus of pilots on the market. So they specifically wanted Airbus or Boeing type-rated pilots, neither of which I was. So I posed the question at the roadshow of whether they would consider non-type-rated pilots. And the answer wasn't an outright no. So being the optimist I am, when we left the roadshow, I said to my wife, at the time we were 12, I think it was 11 or 12 years into my career. I'm not going to go and spend another 3 years in another airline for the sake of getting a Boeing or Airbus type rating. The guys didn't say no, so let's pursue this with all we've got. And that's what we did. So I sent my CV off to Emirates every single Sunday morning. Obviously, the UAE being a Muslim country, the weekend falling on a Friday and a Saturday, and being 2 hours ahead of South Africa, I was up at 5:30 in the morning, send the email through so that it was the first email on the desk of the recruitment staff, and I did that for weeks, and eventually they called me for an interview. So I think sometimes persistence in aviation goes a long way. You know, in South Africa, I'm not sure. I think it's quite similar in Brazil from what I've heard, but it's not just a matter of finishing your COM or your ATP license and going straight into an airline. It's a long road, you know.
Brazil and South Africa, they have so many things in common. Sometimes I'm impressed about the amount of things, like, you know, this like jungle flying or dirt strips. Like I have done the same, and João is doing the same now. So I always tell this to João, like that I see myself in what he's doing there, and I like that you went to pursue that. Like you were so focused on that, up to the point that you would wake up 5:30 in the morning on your Sundays, right? And yeah, it does make the difference, right? Some of the guys out there, they don't want to schedule like a flight in the first time of the day, or they just want to, you know, now that I'm teaching English, they don't want to book anything before 8 o'clock or 9 or maybe 10 o'clock, but you know, that's what, you know, like real high achievers like yourself, they must be doing. You know, like wake up early and do your thing and make sure you're the first CV every Sunday. You know, that's it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, Felix. And my other sort of my other approach to aviation was always to try and be the best I could be for the stage I was at. In other words, in South Africa, the way our license works, once you've finished your commercial license, you've got 200 hours, you need 1,500 hours in order to do your ATP. However, prior to that, you can write the ATP exams and get what is referred to as a frozen ATP. So a lot of the guys would finish their COM, they would enjoy the flying, sort of be a bit lazy about getting those ATP subjects, whereas I took the approach of, as soon as I could do something, like the ATP subjects, for example, I would get out there and do it straight away, because that way your CV is just that much more attractable to the guy next to you, and that's what you've got to do. I think with anything in life, even outside of aviation, if you want something, you've got to chase it with everything you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. And then eventually they called you. How did that happen?
Yeah, so they called us up. My wife and I went over to the Emirates interview. Emirates prefer the spouse to join you on the interview process to ensure that the family is invested in moving over to the Middle East. And so off we went. The interview process at the time was a 4-day process, the first 3 of which were really grueling 3 days where they pull you through the ring of fire. It would consist of all the usual psychometric tests, panel interview, group exercises, sim check, all that sort of stuff. And I managed to make it through the first 3 days. And then on the 4th day is the medical, which is really seen as a box ticking exercise. So my wife flew off back to South Africa on the morning of the 4th day, as I was due to fly to Zurich that afternoon. At the time, I was an instructor for my previous company, Airline, on the Average 85, so I was going to head out and continue giving flight instruction in Zurich. That's where we conducted our sim training. So I went into the medical, and one of the challenges I've got is that I've got a mild color deficiency. So it was picked up early on in my aviation career in South Africa on my initial medical, and I had to do the Farnsworth lantern test, which is a simple color vision test. Once you've passed the test, you've got grandfather rights for good, because the condition doesn't deteriorate. And I was transparent about this with the Emirates recruitment staff at the roadshow. I said, look, I've got this color deficiency. Is it even worth my time or worth your time, me coming over to Dubai for an interview? And they said, absolutely, come over for an interview. We have many pilots at the moment in active flight duty with a color deficiency. So the medical came along on day 4. There was 2 tests conducted. The Ishihara color test, which is the one you guys will be familiar with the small dots, colorful dots in a small booklet with various numbers. I failed that test, which I knew I would, because I always have. But then they had another test called the CAD test. And unfortunately, the CAD test, I fell just outside the legal parameters. So as you can imagine, Felix and João, at that point, I was devastated. I'd spent now 12 years of my career, put everything into aviation, passed the first 3 days, which is the difficult part of the Emirates interview, to now be faced with this news. So obviously I was absolutely devastated at this news. 12 years into my career, I'd put everything into aviation, and even passed the Emirates interview, or the technical part of it, and now I'm being held back due to the medical. However, the doctor on the day said to me, look, as a last resort, if you would like, you can go over to London, to the London City University, and meet Professor Barber. He created a lot of these color vision tests. You can spend a day with him at your own expense. He'll conduct a variety of tests on you and then submit all the results back to Emirates, and we'll consider them. We'll put them through a medical board, and even then, it's no guarantee of a job. So without a doubt, I said, absolutely, where are his details? How can I get in touch with him? And off I went. I gave Dr. Barber a call, managed to schedule an appointment, which fell during my time in Zurich. And, as South Africans, and I'm sure it may be fairly similar for you guys in Brazil, our passport doesn't get us very far. So it's not that easy to just fly over to London. I needed to get a visa. So my wife was a huge support in that, and she organized the visa for me on the back end. I had to go to the UK embassy in Geneva and get all that done. And they told us it would take 10 days for this visa to come back, but miraculously, it arrived back in 3 days, just in time for me to go to Professor Barber. So long story short, I went over, did all the tests. They came back satisfactory, sent it off to Emirates, and once again, heard nothing back from them. So I started hounding them again, just as I did before with the application in the first place. I would message, email, and call them every week, and nothing happened. And eventually my wife and I started getting a little bit despondent, because you got to know something about my wife and I. Once we set our eyes on a goal, we pray it, believe it, trust in it, talk it, and go out there and get it. And we were almost delusional about the fact that we were getting into Emirates, and now we had this big blow. Anyway, one day we were down on the beach on the east coast of South Africa and really feeling quite despondent. And she said to me, we're going to stop being negative. We're going to stop going down a negative spiral, and we're going to speak this into being. I'm telling you now, you're an Emirates pilot, and Emirates is going to call you up tomorrow. So the next day I came out of a surf. It was a Sunday morning, first day of the week in Dubai. And I was standing on the veranda, still dripping wet in my wetsuit, had my phone lying on the table. And my wife said to me, your phone is going to ring now. It's going to be Emirates calling you for a job. I said, I think we just forget about this Emirates thing now. I think we're taking it way too far. And sure enough, at that moment, my phone started ringing, and it was a +971 dialing code. We were blown away, and I got the job.
My God, she's got some context. Jeez. It's like, wow. It's like,
she has some spiritual connections.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is simply amazing, man. And coming from you, I just couldn't believe it more, like, wow, this is so great, man.
Jason, can you put us a little bit back in your process? How many flight hours have you logged in your log? Have you flown actually, and before the process? And how was the process? What were the steps you took to prepare yourself, and the phases you faced in the process for Emirates.
Sure, Shal. The hours I had prior to Emirates was in the region of 4,000 hours. I now have 7,500. So I did about 3,500 during my time at Emirates. And the process I found really challenging. One of the most challenging parts for me was the basic mathematics. I was fortunately advised at the time to go onto a website called Latest Pilot Jobs, and on there you could purchase for a couple of $100 a whole Emirates interview preparation process, which I did. And they gave a lot of clues on there as to what the interview would entail. And a lot of it was basic maths. And I'm talking about division and subtraction, and Felix will know all about it. But my maths at that stage, now 12 years after leaving school and having a calculator at hand, was a little bit rusty, to put it mildly. So fortunately, my wife is a qualified maths teacher, so I spent many hours with her. In fact, the one day I remember spending 16 hours. I spent 16 hours preparing on one day alone, just on maths, because you're time limited in the interview, so you can't afford to waste any time. So I did a lot of preparation on specifics like that, and there was also a bit of compass testing online that you were able to practice with, sort of simulated compass testing. That was what you could expect at the Emirates interview. And then I got hold of guys who had been through the interview process. I always believe that's the best way to prepare, is to ask somebody who's been there and done that, and pick up some tips from them. I also did a lot of mock interviews. My wife, again, I'm mentioning her a lot, but she's been a huge support in my career. Her and I met when we were 12 years old, so we know each other obviously very well, and she's been by my side throughout my aviation career, from Cessna 152 right up to the 380, and she's been the one always there asking me memory items and limitations and things like that, and that's been a huge support. So yes, other than that, flight preparation, the one other thing I did, obviously I'd never flown a Boeing or an Airbus. So going to the interview at Emirates, you're not sure whether they're going to give you a sim check on the Boeing or the Airbus until you get there. So I had the opportunity of going to fly an Airbus 320 simulator at South African Airways. I had a friend there who was a trainer, and he very kindly gave me a whole hour session in the 320 simulator. And then, you won't believe it, on the day I got the 777. So but it was a very challenging, a very, very challenging process, I found. The first day I got there were 6 of us. The second morning when I woke up, I found out that the other 5 had disappeared. I was the only one left, and I was joined to another group of guys. And that's sort of what it was like. The group of guys that I joined were also from groups that had been cut down to 1 or 2 guys. And that's how the process went.
For how long have you prepared? How was your timeline when you said, okay, now it's time to go?
Felix, I can't give you an exact answer on that. I cannot remember the exact dates, but I had a minimum of 3 weeks. But I think it was somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks that I had to prepare, and I did absolutely everything I could, and part of my preparation that I didn't mention now, besides the technical things, was simple things like going to buy a brand new suit. I thought, if I'm going to go for an Emirates interview, I want to give it my best shot. If I fail this interview, I want to walk away from there knowing that I gave it my absolute best. So I went as far as to buying new shoes, a new flight bag. I went in there prepped as I could from every angle, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and it pays off in the end. Huh? It is what it is. So and yeah, I'm pretty sure João is guiding it through a path that most of our followers down there in Brazil, they want to know about. They really want to know, how is that process, and how is the interview, like what are the questions that they ask, and then once you're in, how does it look like, what is the training, how is that thing, of getting into the multicultural environment and getting to fly, and even your the colleagues that you fly every day, and the cabin crew in the back, and so on. So for me, it's also nice to hear from you, like what did you feel like during that period, and what is your take on that?
Well, I really do believe that Emirates is very good at choosing their staff. So I must be honest, during my 5 years at Emirates, very seldom did I come across a difficult person. Most of the crew, both pilots and cabin crew and management staff, are fantastic people. So as far as that goes, I felt welcomed. I felt a huge amount of pressure, obviously. There's a very high standard expected, and rightfully so, being an international wide body long haul operation. The standard has to be there. There cannot be any compromise. But having said that, the crew in general were really nice crew. On my initial course, I remember arriving, there was a batch of 15 of us, and one of the first things that struck me and that took some getting used to was the variety of cultures. I was the only South African. There were Brazilians, there were Italians, there were Mexicans. There was a variety of guys from all over the world, and very quickly I realized how important communication is. I remember on one of my first lectures, I arrived late, and I walked into the room and said, "Sorry, I was late, guys. All the robots were red, and the city center circle had a traffic jam." And everyone sort of looked at me like I was crazy. And when we walked out at the first tea break, one of my colleagues, an Italian guy, came up to me and he said, "What are robots and what is a circle?" And I very quickly realized, obviously South Africans have a lingo of our own, as do every other culture. So communication was very important in that process, in terms of putting yourself across and your message across clearly. As far as the questions go during the interview process, I think a lot of what they're looking for in the process is that the candidate is trainable. So they want a guy who's going to come in there with a good attitude, and he's trainable, and provided he knows the minimum level required, that's good enough. But he needs to be confident, he needs to be trainable, and he needs to be adaptable to fit into a multicultural operation like this.
I think I should invite Jason to be part of Farol de Pouso, for interviews. Like, as me and João, we're always having some plans on, like, how can we help Brazilians to get there. So maybe we're gonna invite you to be our business partner for that, Jason, because this is so good. Like, even the words that you select to convey the message, it's just superb, like trainable and adaptable. And when you mentioned that landing over there in Dar es Salaam, you said, like, what else? Safe and
satisfactory standards.
Satisfactory landing. It's like so good, Jason. And that's it.
Good.
Man,
thank you.
Once you enter the airline, and tell us about the training, and then when you are on the line, when you're flying, how was to get adapted to the wide body, and how was then thereafter to jump to the 4-engine aircraft. So tell us about this transition. I'm curious about it.
Yeah, sure. So, the training is interesting. I mentioned on a recent podcast earlier this week that Emirates is a huge operation. At the time that I was there was approximately 4,800 pilots, 250 aeroplanes and 25,000 cabin crew. So it's impersonal to a large degree. You're not going to be spoon-fed. In other words, you're not going to arrive at a sim session and have the instructor phone you the night before and pre-brief you on what to expect. But having said that, Emirates has fantastic resources. So they've got a company portal where you can access absolutely everything you need. You can access the sim session that you've got for the following day, which simulator it's in, which training building it's in, and which briefing room it's in. And all those small details are really important to reduce your stress on the day. So in terms of preparing for your simulator session, those are all the starting points you would find out, who my sim partner is, who the instructor is, and what time the session is, where it is, and you would rock up prepared accordingly. And all the material in order to prepare accordingly was really easily accessible on the company portal. So you would go in and majority of the time you would fly with an instructor that you had never met before, which was a good thing because you got a different perspective each time. Each guy has a different angle, has a different amount of experience to share with you. And it was a steep learning curve, that's for sure, because for me it was my first Airbus and also first wide body. I was fortunate enough to be paired up with a Mexican guy, actually, from close to your part of the woods, and a very nice guy. He had some he had some previous Airbus 320 experience. So that was a huge help for me. Him and I would spend many hours prior to each sim session, sitting together, running through the session, practicing the call outs, the actions, our contingency plans if things didn't go to plan, everything. And I think preparation is key. If you rock up well prepared, the instructor sees that immediately. Within 5 minutes of the briefing, the instructor knows these guys have prepared accordingly, and then you have a fantastic, in fact, you have a fun session. I enjoyed a lot of the training, in all honesty, at my time at Emirates. But then again, you hear about the guys who arrive unprepared, and it's a nightmare for them. So preparation is certainly key. And then moving on to the second part of your question, as far as flying the wide body and adapting to the line, I think one of my fondest memories of Emirates was my first flight in the 330. At my previous airline, on both the Average 85 and the one before that on the 1900, as part of the type rating, they would take you to the hangar, show you around the aeroplane. You could climb inside it, under it, on top of it, around it. You really got a good feel for the airplane. So by the time you came to your first flight, you had a good idea and you were comfortable around the airplane. Whereas at Emirates, that wasn't the case. They just couldn't afford to go and send hundreds of guys through the hangar to go and look at airplanes before flying them. So I'll never forget my first flight on the 330. The bus, we jump in a bus underground. It goes through an underground network of roads and eventually pops up at your parking bay. And we climbed out the bus, and I looked up at this 330, and it was the biggest thing I'd ever seen, and and it was a really overwhelming feeling to think I'm now going to go and climb in that airplane and fly it. And that's where it takes a huge amount of confidence. One has to believe in yourself and go out there and do it. But having said that, the instructor on the day was a fantastic guy. He really put me at ease, as he did for all my colleagues. I recall all of them having similar stories. And again, just another moment that stuck out to me that day was when I called for start and pushback. I called Tower up and said, Emirates, whatever it was, 231, request start and pushback. And just something as simple as that, which may sound silly to you listening to this now, it's a big event at the time, and you feel like a fish out of water, out of your comfort zone. You look to your left, and the guy isn't sitting right here, shoulder to shoulder. He's sitting a meter away from you, and just the size and the atmosphere, it's quite incredible.
Very nice, Jason. And then I wanted to change subjects like completely to talk about what is happening now in this moment that we're living in, and what are you doing at your day, so that we were talking about all the good parts of the story, but sadly we have sad parts, and parts that comes with a lot of resilience, and it's a different sort of motivation that you have to find somewhere. So part of like why you're here today is because you're doing something really remarkable, and I wanted to share with our community down there in Brazil, so that everybody knows who you are and what you do and why do you do it. So tell us all about it, like where are you now, and why, and what are you doing?
Thank you, Felix. If I could step back just a little bit to make the story more clear for the listeners. You know, towards the end of my time at Emirates, I did the command assessment and I was set for a command course. My last flight was from Sydney back to Dubai on the 9th of March, 2020. And then my command course was due to start a couple of days later. So I've got 4 young kids. Their school in Dubai closed at the time due to COVID, which I said to my wife, that's perfect. You guys head back to South Africa. I can have a nice quiet villa to study in and focus on this command course. So off they went. I started the course. 3 days into the course, the training college closed down. A couple of weeks later, I went on to a 50% pay cut. And a couple of months after that, lost the job altogether. But the reason why I tell you this is it was during that period, it was a 5-month period that I was stuck in Dubai alone, separated from my family, that Go Aviate was born. And, you know, I sat there after a week of sitting at home. I thought to myself, I cannot afford to waste all this valuable time. Normally my house is like a zoo with all these kids running around. Now I've got hours on end, time on my hands. So what can I do to make my days productive? So I had the idea of putting together some aviation educational videos. I used some of my previous instruction experience and started making a few simple little videos on aerodynamics and things like that. I started a YouTube channel, called it Go Aviate, and I started putting out these videos 3 times a week, which gained some nice momentum, and I think I was onto something good. But then the move back to South Africa happened, and that's one of the negatives of living and working overseas, is when you lose your job in a foreign country, you don't only lose your job, but you essentially lose your life. So you've got to move back to your home country, you've got to move your kids out of the school they're in to a new school, lose your friendship circle, and the list goes on. So I moved back to South Africa and spent a couple of months readjusting back to life at home, getting used to the family life again, and obviously very busy with all the logistics involved in moving country. So Go Aviate was put on hold for a short period, but during that period, Felix, I very quickly started to realize the impact of this pandemic on the aviation industry, and that it was absolutely no joke. You know, the amount of guys being impacted is heart-wrenching. I suddenly found out that one of my ex-380 colleagues was running a garden service business in Australia. Another one was driving trucks in Europe. Another one farming maize in the States. And then in South Africa, I have friends that are selling meat. And the list goes on. Mm-hmm. So I thought to myself, you know, putting out aviation educational videos isn't really useful right now. Guys aren't sitting at home thinking they want to learn about the inner workings of a turbine engine right now. That's irrelevant. You know, guys are in negative headspaces. They've lost their job. And not only the guys who've lost their jobs, but even the guys who've been fortunate to maintain their jobs. They're living in a stressful new environment. They have pressures of their own to deal with. So that's where I sort of put thought to paper and came up with the idea of a aviation social network, which isn't just for pilots, but it's also for cabin crew, ATC, aviation business owners, flight schools, basically anybody connected to the aviation industry, and a one-stop shop, if you could call it that. So, Go Aviate, the pilot network, which now we have an app in both Apple and Android available. There's also the website part of it as well. Basically, what it offers is a lot of what your other social medias offer in terms of, in the likes of Facebook or LinkedIn. There's social feeds, there's groups, there's forums, but more than that, there's peer support. A lot of guys are struggling mentally. Marriages are taking strain. In fact, a lot of friends of ours, their marriages have sadly come to an end through all this. So there's peer support, there's courses, online courses, there's vlogs, blogs, and podcasts. So for guys like you who've shown incredible initiative starting up a podcast, you can put your podcasts on there, and the list goes on. So that's what it's really all about. It's all free. Signing up is free. Doing all these functions I've mentioned is free. The only area that we charge is for courses that are for sale. We've got free courses, and then we've got chargeable courses. So if anyone comes along and says to us, look, we want to put a course on Go Aviate and we charge $100 for the course, then we take a cut of that. And then we also have an online shop. So you could sell aviation apparel or whatever the case may be. And one last very important point to Go Aviate is we've got a business directory for guys to advertise their business. And it doesn't have to be aviation related, that part. Like this podcast, it is an aviation podcast, but for guys who've taken the initiative to go and start a business, they can now advertise their business. They may even recruit staff for their business through Go Aviate. And that's what we're trying to do, is bring the community together, collaborate, support each other. That's what it's all about.
Man, this is just incredible, and how strong your mindset is since your beginning. I'm really delighted to have you here. I don't know what else Felix could add, but unfortunately it's a sad story until now. But you show us a lot of good things, and I wrote something here that I think is the main point. Preparation is key. So for everything, right? So thank you for being here, for accepting our invite. I think it will add a lot of knowledge to our listeners.
Jason,
absolutely.
As you can hear João's words there, we're kind of heading towards the end of it. And I am totally honored to have such an uplifting person as you being part of our podcast here, and you're showing us that like there are several ways to overcome the deals that the ordeal that comes in this terrible times. And we know for sure there are lots of families and people throughout the world that are facing even worse scenarios than you are now. So I'm totally sympathetic towards those families as well. We lost one very good friend, and we don't know what's going to happen with the business, for instance. Like this kind of things, like real life problems that we are all well aware of that. But just so before we go to that final recap and do the bye-byes and stuff, I just want to ask you, like, how do you deal with that in the real life? So like if there's someone in the driving his car now in the traffic jam somewhere there in Porto Alegre, going to his jet trainer, so as one of our friends, like what would you tell to this guy? Like, just hold on, do this, do that. Like, I know you're into exercise, so give them your advice.
Absolutely, Felix. I think up front I'll say that for me it hasn't been all peaches and roses. I sit here, I speak positively, But myself, just like everybody else, I've been through my highs, but I've also been through some serious lows. It is a rocky road, and some days are just that much more difficult than others. You see an airplane fly overhead and something wells up inside of you, an emotion, even anger in some cases, a disbelief, denial, and all these things, which are all part of the grieving process. But the way that I've overcome that and dealt with it is really exercise, as you mentioned, is huge for me. I find that it clears my mind. I love paddling, so I spend a lot of time out on my surf ski or my canoe. I do a lot of running, and that time that I spend out there, my mind focuses purely on what I'm doing. I get fresh air and it releases endorphins. It's fantastic. The other way I cope is I try to break things up into steps. Many years ago, I paddled a surf ski race in South Africa from Port Elizabeth to East London. It's 250 kilometers over 4 days in the ocean. So it's really long. The first day alone is 80 kilometers. And if you think about, when you're 10 kilometers in, if you think I've still got 70 kilometers to go, your mind starts breaking down. You're not going to make it. So the way I would make it through each day was I would focus on the next point. Our coastline is made up of a series of bays. So I would paddle from point to point and tell myself, if I can just get from here to the next point, I'll be good. And then when I get to the next point, I'd look at the next point and say, right, if I can now just make it to the next point. And I think if we could use that analogy in this time and just sort of achieve one goal, one step at a time. Because as soon as we start overthinking about the magnitude of what's happened and what if and how and when, very quickly we can fall into a negative headspace. And the last thing I'll say about that and about coping is that pilots generally have a certain level of ego and pride. We all do. It goes with the job. And I just want to say to anyone listening out there that there's absolutely no shame. There's no shame whatsoever in getting professional help. We're so scared of doing anything that we feel may compromise our license in the future, because you know what it's like. We go for these psychometrics, we go for these medical tests, but to go and speak to somebody can help hugely. There's a woman here in South Africa. She's a life coach. She's not a psychologist. She's studying psychology, but a lot of pilots here have gone to her. She's very kindly offered 1 hour free sessions to pilots, and just to have a chat with her. Her husband's an ex-pilot as well who lost her job, so she has a good understanding of how a pilot thinks and what we're going through. And I must say, there's no shame in getting help. Rather get help for the sake of your loved ones than struggle on your own. I strongly believe in that.
Jason Northwood, an incredible aviator, bright soul, founder of Go Aviate. And in this episode, we just covered lots of interesting things, from flying in Africa, dirt strips, low support, low ATC, you're clear to do whatever you want to do kind of clearances. And then Jason's transition into turboprops and jets, and then wide body 330, 380. And, he was lecturing us about motivation and how to prepare and so on. But also with the challenges of COVID-19, he's showing us, ways to overcome this pandemic. And I totally agree with you. And that's also part of what we try to do in Farol de Pouso. We try to help people, it's some sort of peer support as well, and also a little bit of networking. So it's the same as Go Aviate in some cases. But we've been talking about the intricate works of a jet engine, but that's just part of it. And so now thank you really much. Thank you very much for showing us ways to cope and overcome. And one last thing that I have to highlight again here is you are a high achiever, and you are teaching the world how to become a high achiever and how to reposition yourself as a high achiever, you know, going step by step, pedaling bay after bay, and, you know, getting things done. I always say that this as well, like put things in a checklist. So you have a checkbox, you have a line. I learned this with a very good sage friend of mine from California. Draw your little square and put a line. So you said, today I'm gonna study about this. Tick the box, done. That's how you deal with things, right? And that's how you grow and you be wherever you want to be again. And a big shout out to your wife and to your family for being part of this story, the whole thing. And on behalf of the whole Farol de Pouso team and all of the Brazilians from north, south, east, west, African jungle, beautiful paradise beach in the northeast, or, you know, the wine drinking people from the south where they love the barbecues just the same as in South Africa. A big and huge thank you, Jason Northwood.
Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you, João. One parting word I would like to say, if that's okay, and that is, Felix, you know, since the day I had the privilege of meeting you about 6 years ago, I think it was now, you've always shone out as an incredibly optimistic, full of life person. You're somebody who goes out there and gets it, and you've really been a huge inspiration to me, and hats off to yourself and João. I really admire you guys starting up a podcast in times like these. Instead of sitting around, you taking action, you're making a huge difference to the lives of so many viewers and listeners out there. So well done to you. Keep going, guys. I'm looking forward to seeing where this podcast goes, because it's going to the moon, that's for sure.
Thanks for your kind words, and thank you very much once again. João?
You said everything, man. I don't have anything to add.
Speechless?
I'm now speechless, as always. Jason, thanks for having us. Thanks for your time on your Friday evening. And, wow, that's it. I don't have anything to say at all. Thank you. Thank you for your time, for transferring us your experience, and I learned a lot, and I'm so absolutely sure that our listeners will learn also. Okay, thanks, man. Thank all you boys, and see you next time at Farol de Pouso, your weekly podcast.